Nous étions ici la semaine dernière avec les syndicats pour discuter le cercle qui se passe maintenant dans le comité de ressources naturelles. As I said at that point, and I'm pleased to be joined here by a number of colleagues, including Charlie Angus from the New Democratic Party and a number of my colleagues from the Liberal caucus, but also a couple of important environmental voices that you will hear from. The situation in the Resource Committee, where the Conservative Party is simply blocking the ability to even have a conversation, is a ridiculous waste of taxpayer resources. It is particularly problematic because the two bills that they are holding off are important pieces of moving this country forward from an economic perspective to ensure that we have good jobs and economic prosperity across this country as we move and transition towards a lower carbon future. One relates to offshore wind and the development of offshore wind resources and the hydrogen industry in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. It is supported by the Premier of Nova Scotia. It is something that industry in both of those provinces are very anxious to see move forward. The other being the Sustainable Jobs Act, which is, again, a critical piece of helping the government to work collaboratively with civil society to build an economy that will thrive going forward. It is, as I say, an enormous waste of taxpayer resources. It is something that I don't think anybody in this place can remember ever happening to this extent before. It is endangering the health of the translators who work in that committee. It is simply a ridiculous tactic, and I think it is far, far beyond time that the Conservative Party actually do its job.
We have come off the most catastrophic climate summer ever. We've had 200,000 Canadian people dislocated. 60% of Canada's small businesses directly affected by the climate catastrophe that's unfolding. At the same time, we have seen over 45,000 jobs lost in the energy sector, 1,500 jobs at Suncor alone this year. Workers came to us at the New Democratic Party and said, we need to start building a transition, a transformation that takes advantage of the enormous skills that we have, the enormous skills that Canada has in terms of resources to build a sustainable energy future. This happening while the Biden administration is unleashing an unprecedented economic renaissance for the transformation of the economy. And yet, here in Canada, our work to get offshore wind and the Atlantic regions built up for sustainable energy is being blocked. Our sustainable jobs plan that will have workers at the table is being interfered with by the most juvenile, vicious, childish tactics I have ever seen. Day after day after day, we're seeing this interference, and it comes down to the fundamental thing that the Conservatives have done from the beginning on this legislation, which is to stop workers from speaking, stop Labour from speaking, and they want to stop workers from having a seat at the table in the transformation that is underway. We're telling them, Pierre Poilievre, to stop these games, to listen to the workers who are calling for a better future. And we're very pleased that we have representatives of the environmental community who've done an amazing job working with workers, working with us across party lines, because Canada cannot afford to miss this opportunity in the midst of this climate crisis, in the midst of this once-in-a-century opportunity. The Conservatives have to stop obstructing, and we have to move forward on an energy plan for this nation.
Bonjour tout le monde, Caroline Brouillette, je suis la directrice générale du Réseau Action Climat Canada. The global economic transformation is happening. We've seen this in the World Energy Outlook that was recently published by the International Energy Agency. Investments in clean energy and clean technology are happening at a rhythm that is far faster than what had been predicted. So whether we want more climate policy or not, and I can assure you that Canadians and Climate Action Network do want more climate policy, the question for us in Canada is what we're going to do about this. Are we going to let this happen to us, risking leaving workers and communities behind, or are we going to plan proactively to make sure that workers and communities are brought along and have a seat at the table? And that's just what the Sustainable Jobs Act proposes to do. Toutefois, ce qu'on voit en ce moment, c'est que les conservateurs font des tactiques d'obstruction et de délai en comité, ce qui ne permet finalement d'avoir aucune conversation sur l'avancement du projet de loi. On a des membres du Réseau Action Climat, des syndicats qui sont à Ottawa cette semaine pour venir parler de leurs propositions pour le projet de loi. On a des membres qui souhaitent renforcer le projet de loi, mais à cause de toutes ces chamailleries, c'est impossible. The Conservatives can filibuster this bill, but they cannot filibuster the energy transition. And we need mechanisms that make sure that workers and communities are at the table and are supported through this transition. Je vais le redire en français, les conservateurs peuvent tenter de retarder ce projet de loi, mais ils ne peuvent retarder la transition énergétique qui est en train de se produire mondialement et au Canada. Les investissements bougent déjà en ce sens. Et donc, la question, c'est est-ce qu'on va se doter de mécanismes qui permettent d'avoir les travailleurs et les communautés à la table? Et c'est ce que permet de faire le projet de loi sur les emplois durables. Maintenant, on doit avoir une conversation mature sur le sujet. Merci.
I am Chris Severson-Baker. I'm the Executive Director of the Pembina Institute, a clean energy think tank based in Calgary, Alberta. And this is a really important piece of legislation, and we're here to strongly encourage the Conservative Party to allow this committee to do its important work. Our organization has some very specific changes that we would like to recommend to the committee to strengthen this bill before it moves forward. And we really see this as an important way for Labour to have a real seat at the table. A clean economy and the kind of changes that are about to happen as a result of implementing a series of really important climate legislation are going to have an impact on workers and communities across this whole country. And what I always hear when I talk to labour groups and workers in a variety of sectors is that they're supportive of this change. They see the opportunity that it represents. But the most important thing is that there's time to anticipate these changes, to prepare, to acquire the skills that are going to be needed in order to fully participate and take advantage of these opportunities. And that's what this bill is really intended to achieve. Thank you very much.
Minister Wilkinson, I have two questions for you. Why can't you just use your majority at the committee to clear this?
I think some of the members of the committee may want to comment on that, but we would certainly like to. They simply are not allowing the committee to even begin proceedings. I mean, Mr. Angus has had the floor now for, I think, 4 meetings in a row, and he hasn't been able to even begin to talk. So this is a tactic that we have never seen before. It is something that is essentially ground to the halt the committee. It's an enormous waste of time. I mean, Canadians don't elect us to come here to sit on our butts and just pretend that we're actually doing work. They actually elect us to come here to do a job. They expect us to do something. And this tactic is a bizarre sort of interpretation of what they may think their job is.
So what are you prepared to do to move things forward?
Well, I mean, we're looking to try to increase the pressure on the Conservative Party to give way. We will continue to do that through forums like this, work with the environmental community, with the labour community, with industry eventually, to try to ensure that we are moving this forward. But, you know, all options are on the table in terms of we can't go on like this. Like, it's just ridiculous. So we are looking at a whole range of different things.
And finally, there's a bill on the carbon tax, removing it for farmers, I believe just for propane for grain drying. If it passes in the Senate, which it looks like it will, how will you be responding to that? Or your government? Maybe that's a Guilbeault question.
It's probably more a Guilbeault question, but do you want to take that? Sure.
Only too happy to.
So I guess the first thing I'd like to say is what is Pierre Poilievre so afraid of? Why can't we have a conversation about the development of renewable energy in Atlantic Canada that will likely create thousands of jobs, which will help provide electricity, clean, affordable electricity, to millions of Atlantic and Canadians overall? Why is he so afraid of? He was standing here last week, and some of you asked him about, you know, what he would do regarding the Paris Agreement, and he looked like a deer in front of spotlight. Like he couldn't answer. Why? Because he's afraid to tell you that he doesn't believe in climate change, and that would also mean he would have to stop cozying up to his friend in big oil companies. That's what's at stake here. In terms of, I mean, we will see what the Senate does with Bill C-234, and we will obviously work with the Senate and follow up with the decision that they make.
Est-ce que c'est un recul, ça, c'est de 34, parce que ça a l'air d'être en voie d'être adopté. Est-ce que ça constitue une brèche importante, d'après vous?
Bien, il faut comprendre que déjà, nous nous étions opposés à la Chambre à ce projet de loi-là. Il faut comprendre que dans la conception du système de pollution, du prix sur la pollution, on a déjà exclu 97 des combustibles qui sont utilisés par le secteur agricole, notamment pour la machinerie, simplement parce qu'on savait qu'il n'y avait pas d'alternative. Alors que pour le séchage du grain, il y a des alternatives. Nous avons mis en place des programmes de plusieurs centaines de millions de dollars pour accompagner les agriculteurs dans cette transformation-là. Et les programmes fonctionnent. Ce que font les conservateurs, c'est une bataille idéologique envers le fait de mettre un prix sur la pollution. Pourquoi? Parce que ça va nous forcer à réduire notre dépendance au pétrole. Et ça, ils ne veulent pas ça. Ils veulent continuer d'être copains-copains avec leurs amis des grandes compagnies pétrolières.
Vous avez dit que tant que...
Je ne voudrais pas monopoliser, c'est vraiment...
Vous aviez dit que tant que vous seriez ministre de l'Environnement, il n'y aurait pas d'autres brèches à la tarification du carbone. Ça, c'est 2,34. À votre esprit, est-ce que ça en est une? Et votre choix de mots a été très, je ne vais pas interpréter, mais il y a eu beaucoup d'importance accordée au choix de vos mots. Est-ce que vous songez à quitter si la tarification carbone ne reste plus telle qu'elle?
Non, pas du tout. Et tout ce que j'ai fait, c'est reprendre les mots du premier ministre qui a dit qu'il n'y aurait plus de brèche dans la tarification carbone.
Mais est-ce que c'est une brèche à vous?
I wanted to answer our question from CBC as to why we cannot use the majority on our committee to get this legislation passed. This is how committees work. What we're actually found ourselves in a situation is that the Conservatives are using a tactic of all of them shouting and attacking into the mics at the same time, that the chair can speak to this. We've had to suspend multiple times because of issues of health and safety for our translators. We've raised multiple concerns that if this kind of behavior happens, one of the translators could be injured. This is an issue they've raised with us in the past, but the Conservatives are using this now as a means to actually stop the committee from meeting, so we end up having to suspend time and time again because of the basic health and safety threat posed to the translators to do their job.
That's what I wanted to ask about. Like, can you explain how an injury would happen? Like, how is the health and safety of interpreters being put at risk here?
We had a translator at the Senate who I believe was sent to hospital. They have to listen into the hearing. There's been multiple questions all through the Zoom hearings, all through the COVID period, that we had to be super careful about how we use the microphones. But we've never been in a situation where multiple members of a party will speak into the mics loudly at the same time while the translators are attempting to translate. It has caused serious issues. We have been called upon it. And each committee, and the chair could speak better to it than I can, that the issue of safety for translators has been a big issue that we're all supposed to take seriously. But in this committee, it's used as a tactic to actually shut down the ability. And now, in my position, I'm 4 days into hearings where I haven't even been allowed to speak because of these tactics we have to keep shutting down.
My priority as chair of the committee is to make sure that all honourable parliamentarians have an opportunity to participate. Mr. Angus has had the floor for several meetings and has been prevented from participating in debate. The concern on the health and safety of our translators, who do a tremendous job, is a concern that I take very seriously. I've had to suspend several meetings due to my concern that our translators could be injured. This is a priority. This is a health and safety concern that I take very seriously, and I will continue to suspend meetings if I believe that members are not ensuring that their health and safety is protected. We have a number of members shouting across the floor, shouting into the mics at the same time. This does propose a health and safety risk for our interpreters, and I will do everything I can to make sure that their health and safety is protected.
what brought this on? How soon can we see it become law, I guess?
So page 22 of our platform.
Yes.
But also, a big part of the agreement that we have with the NDP.
Yeah.
I worked with Alexandra Boulerice, hand in glove, and we managed to get something I think done that is quite meaningful. So basically, we're banning replacement workers. It was, like I said, it was a commitment, but it was something that, when I came in as Labour Minister, I had a bit of a steeper learning curve, let's say, than Mr. Boulerice, and a number of people, both on our side and the NDP side, who were steeped in the union movement, who know it inside out. Pascal Sanange, for instance, was a tremendous help to me. But this is a big deal. Like, Canadian Labour's been asking for this longer than Canada. This dates back to the Upper Canada, Lower Canada days. Yeah. And it's time. Its time is past.
What changed the Liberal Party's mind on it? Because you guys have been in power many times since the Labour movement has been
we have a really, really good relationship with the Labour movement. We've done an awful lot together, on paid sick leave and a number of other things. This is something that they've been asking for, and we thought it was doable. The country's going through a labour shortage at the moment, and in my experience now, having been around the negotiating table more than once, the thing is, every time when you introduce something like replacement workers, it takes away from people finding a deal. And the deals are done at the table. And if you've got the threat of somebody coming in through the back door and taking all the jobs, it completely not only distracts from the deal. We're seeing this Port of Quebec right now, months and months and months on the go, but it also poisons that workplace for sometimes generations. Like, it's just not productive. It does not get any closer to the deal. I don't like it any more than I like back to work legislation. Do the work, get the deal. In the private sector, federally regulated private sector, a lot of it has to do with supply chains. These people are all paid good money to look after those supply chains in our behalf, both on the union side and the employer side. Do the work. Now, here's the other thing. In a certain context here, 96% of disputes are settled by our Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, which, a lot of the union leadership who were surrounding me there today and NDP MPs all agreed they are the best in the business. 96% of the time, they help them get the deal done. It's that 4% that we ought to close the gap on, but we've come to an agreement on what we call maintenance of activities, so that, once bargaining begins, the union and the employer have to sit down and say, okay, like, what's essential here? What do we need to make sure we look after for the health and safety of our workers, for the workplace, for the environment? And they have 2 weeks to come to that agreement. After that, the Canada Industrial Review Board will come to that agreement for them within 90 days. So we now have more of a timeline and certainty and surety, which is something that business has been asking for too. So the sooner we get the deals, the more surety and certainty comes to our supply chains. I'm very confident this legislation hits the mark.
So we're at step one of the legislative process right now. Are we going to have this done before the next election?
Oh yeah, I hope so. I think there seems to be a lot of goodwill on all sides. It will require 18 months once it receives royal assent, and that's because we went to the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service and the Canada Industrial Review Board, and these are the kind of the referees at the table. They're more than that, actually. They help massage and get the deal done. And they said, you're right. Everything you're saying in your speech is about this being the biggest thing to happen to collective bargaining in decades. It is, so we need time. We need time to understand it. We need time to get our resources in order. We need time to hire more people and then train them in what is a game changer. It is a game changer, but I think a very positive one for our supply chains and for stability and certainty in the economy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Very, very excited about it. Very excited. Just the fact that we've been pushing for this for such a long time. Labour has been pushing for this to happen, and because of the Supply and Confidence Agreement, because of the incredible work that Labour leaders have done, that Jagmeet has done, that our critic Alex Boulerice has done, it's going to happen. We're actually getting the support for workers. I'm really excited about it. I'm so grateful for everybody who did the hard work.
The Liberal government could just drag out the process to the next election and have it die somewhere between here and royal assent?
I always have that worry. The Liberals are great at making promises. They're not always great at following through with those promises. But we are in the House. We're going to be pushing it. We're going to be using all the power that we have to make sure that it gets through. Thank you.
Just faire a statement sur Air Canada. So, as you know, I asked Air Canada to come here and meet with me and my colleague today to discuss about recent events which were totally unacceptable. We told them the events were unacceptable. The CEO was there, a couple of vice presidents. We asked them if they have a plan. If they didn't, they needed one. And if they had one, it obviously wasn't working. They told us what they were doing, what they expect to do, and we'll meet again to see how things are improving very soon, in December actually. Alors j'avais convoqué Air Canada pour venir rencontrer ma collègue ainsi que moi-même suite aux événements absolument inacceptables. Je leur ai dit, on leur a dit que c'était absolument inacceptable. Ils sont d'accord avec nous. Je leur ai demandé s'ils avaient un plan parce que s'il n'y en avait pas, ça en prenait un. S'il y en avait un, il ne marchait clairement pas. Alors on a discuté de leurs priorités pour corriger le tir au niveau de la formation, de l'équipement, du débarquement, embarquement. On les rencontre encore en décembre pour voir comment ça va.
So you've had this meeting. What can you tell people like Rodney Hodgins, like Ryan LaChance, like Alessia Di Virgilio, that they're actually going to see action from Air Canada? And what can your government do to hold Air Canada to their word and accountable?
Well, the first thing we told Air Canada that was unacceptable what happened, and they agreed with us. We told them that they need a clear plan on the short term and long term. We're going to meet again in December to see how things improve.
Absolutely. I mean, let me just reiterate what my colleague said. It's absolutely unacceptable how persons with disabilities have been treated, particularly in the recent incidences that we've seen. We made that very clear to their CEO and the other vice presidents that were there. Not only do airlines, need to be held accountable, they need to a lot better, and they put forward a comprehensive plan on the short term and in the long term to ensure that there's clear deliverables for persons with disabilities. And as my colleague said, we're going to have another meeting in December to ensure that we continue to hold them accountable.
Air Canada is the flag carrier. It touts itself as the flag carrier. That's a distinction that the government awards. Is that something that you would consider revoking from the airline?
It's a big airline. It's not the government airline. It's an important airline. Now, we had that conversation with them, and we want to have a conversation with other companies to make sure that people are respected with dignity and respect.
Do you take any responsibility, because there are many people that have disabilities that say this meeting comes way too long. It took way too long to have this. So does your government take any responsibility for not having this meeting sooner?
Let me talk a little bit about the fact that it was our government that put together an Accessibility Canada Act that passed a few years ago. It is our government that put forward a Disability Inclusion Action Plan, had those clear deliverables to ensure that persons with disabilities, that we're looking at it, whether it is employment, whether it is financial security, whether it is ensuring that we build a barrier-free Canada for Canadians with disabilities. That is a commitment that we made. I know our predecessors have met with airlines in the past, but this is something, when these incidents like these are happening, my colleagues summoned Air Canada to make sure that we have these conversations, hold them accountable. They put together a plan, a comprehensive plan that has short-term and long-term deliverables that we're going to ensure that they follow up with. This is a commitment that they made to us, and we're going to ensure that persons with disabilities continue to be treated with respect and dignity that they deserve.
Sur la menace, il y a une menace terroriste qui pèse, semble-t-il, sur Air India. Il y a des menaces qui ont été proférées. Qu'est-ce que vous en savez et qu'est-ce que vous avez déclenché comme processus, s'il vous plaît?
On prend toutes les menaces au sérieux, en particulier lorsque ça concerne la sécurité aérienne. Donc, on la prend vraiment au sérieux. Il y a une enquête actuellement de la GRC. Et c'est tout ce que je peux dire là-dessus. We take every threat seriously, especially when it concerns airlines. The RCMP is doing an inquiry, investigation, and that's all I can say for now.
Est-ce que vous apparaît plus sérieux que d'autres? Parce que des menaces, j'imagine qu'il y en a régulièrement. Celui-ci.
C'est pas moi à juger du sérieux. Moi, ma job, c'est de faire en sorte que notre système aérien soit sécuritaire. Et c'est pour ça que la GRC
every time Air Canada comes here, they keep talking about, every time they come here, they say, we will do better. Where are the penalties for this, please?
It's the French in OTC. They have the capacity to give penalties. There are consequences.
S'il y a une enquête, est-ce que c'est dire que la menace est sérieuse ou c'est de routine d'ouvrir une enquête dès qu'il y a...
À chaque fois qu'il y a un événement qui concerne la sécurité aérienne, c'est considéré comme très sérieux. Et dans ce cas-ci, ils ont décidé de déclencher une enquête et maintenant, on attendra les résultats. Mais pour nous, la sécurité aérienne, c'est une priorité absolue.
Est-ce que ça vise spécifiquement le Canada ou juste la compagnie en général?
Ce qu'on sait, c'est ce que vous avez vu, vous également aussi. Maintenant, ça sera à la GRC de nous dire ce qu'il y en est. Merci. Thank you.
Vous avez écrit ce matin dans une déclaration qu'il y a eu tentative de sabotage. Est-ce que vous pouvez répéter ces propos-là cet après-midi?
Je vais vous parler comme député de la circonscription de Québec, qui est une des plus belles circonscriptions au Québec, qui se trouve aussi être la capitale nationale du Québec. Je vais vous parler des gens, des aînés, des familles, des étudiants, des gens d'affaires, des environnementalistes qui ont travaillé très fort au cours des 5 dernières années pour faire avancer le projet de tramway. Et j'entends et je comprends et je ressens leur tristesse face à l'annonce d'hier. Je pense que c'est un jour effectivement très triste parce que la Ville de Québec est encore la seule ville de taille comparable au pays à ne pas avoir de transport en commun moderne. Mais c'est parce qu'à Québec, comme partout ailleurs, y compris dans les quartiers centraux de ma circonscription, les gens veulent réduire la pollution et la congestion.
Est-ce qu'il y a eu tentative de sabotage?
De sabotage, il faut expliquer tout ça. Vous avez parlé de tentative de sabotage. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez dire?
Bien, je pense que ça sabote effectivement les efforts de toute ma communauté, des gens partout dans ma circonscription, dans Saint-Jean-Baptiste, dans Saint-Sauveur, dans Saint-Roch, dans Montcalm, qui travaillent depuis tellement longtemps et tellement fort pour nous amener ailleurs, pour amener une circonscription et une région et une ville avec moins de pollution, moins de congestion, plus d'options de transport en commun confortables, fiables, fréquents. Donc, je pense à eux, je suis triste comme eux pour le résultat d'hier, mais je pense qu'il faut continuer parce qu'on ne peut pas se permettre de rester en arrière. Il faut qu'on investisse dans la qualité de vie des gens, dans la santé des gens, puisque c'est ce que je vais continuer à faire.
Qui tente de saboter? Qui tente de saboter?
Bien, moi, je pense que la seule façon par laquelle le gouvernement canadien peut continuer d'appuyer en matière de leadership la Ville de Québec, c'est si le leadership du gouvernement du Québec est là. Et ce qu'on a vu hier, c'est un exercice de sabotage, effectivement, de détournement des efforts des gens de la circonscription. On va continuer à travailler ensemble parce que c'est la seule façon d'avancer.
Le Québec tente de saboter le projet. C'est le gouvernement de la CAQ?
Bien, écoutez, ça me rend un leadership à Québec. Le gouvernement du Québec, hier, a fait ce qu'il a pensé être la chose à faire. Mais ce que je vous dis, c'est que dans ma circonscription, ça fait mal.
Mais on veut juste pas vous mettre des mots dans la bouche. Fait que quand vous dites sabotage, nous, ce qu'on comprend depuis une minute, c'est que vous parlez du gouvernement du Québec, mais on veut pas mal interpréter ce que vous dites. Donc, on veut juste valider que c'est bel et bien ça que vous dites.
Bien, moi, je pense que le gouvernement du Québec a saboté les efforts de ma communauté hier. Parce que c'est une communauté qui a travaillé fort depuis 5 ans, même depuis plus que 5 ans. Ça fait 15 ans que le projet de tramway est en étude et en discussion. Ce sont des efforts qui ont amené les gens à consacrer beaucoup de temps, beaucoup de travail à faire valoir pourquoi il est important de réduire dans ma circonscription et ailleurs dans la ville la congestion, la pollution. C'est dommage, c'est très triste de voir ça. Alors, pour la suite, moi, à nouveau, je constate et je sais que la seule façon par laquelle le gouvernement canadien peut exercer un leadership dans la région de Québec, c'est si le leadership du gouvernement du Québec est aussi présent.
Juste sur ce leadership-là, le financement, parce qu'il y a toutes sortes d'options sur la table, tramway, SRB, métro, peut-être d'autres qu'on ne connaît pas. Est-ce que le financement dont vous avez déjà parlé, celui du fonds récurrent qui va apparaître en 2026, est ouvert à toute forme de transport structurant, même si ce n'est pas un tramway?
À nouveau, la condition, c'est que le gouvernement du Québec exerce son leadership en matière de transport en commun dans la région de Québec et dans la ville de Québec. La seule façon par laquelle le gouvernement canadien peut continuer à faire une différence, et une différence majeure dans la qualité de vie des gens de la région et de la ville, c'est si le gouvernement du Québec est prêt à le faire.
Oui, mais
parce que si le gouvernement du Québec est absent,
importe ou n'importe quel transport structurant ça va?
Ça prend un transport moderne. Une calèche électrique, comme a été mentionné il y a quelques jours par un député de la CAQ, malheureusement, ça ne fonctionne pas. Ça prend un réseau de transport moderne à Québec. Partout ailleurs au pays, on se développe en matière de transport en commun moderne. Partout ailleurs au pays, on veut de l'argent du gouvernement canadien pour réduire la pollution et la congestion. Bien, il faut rentrer dans le 21e siècle. Il faut être en 2023 à Québec comme ailleurs au pays.
Merci beaucoup, M.
Merci.
Oh, bonjour tout le monde. Je suis tellement heureuse d'être ici avec mon chef adjoint, Jonathan Wilkinson.
Bonjour à tous.
Nous sommes disponibles pour les questions dans tous les sujets, mais pour moi-même, le sujet clé du moment is the recent report from Environmental Commissioner Jerry DeMarco. I just attended the questioning of Commissioner DeMarco at the Environment Committee, which underlined some of his ongoing concerns, particularly that some key elements of the government's plan for climate action by 2030 remain unavailable to the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development within the Office of the Auditor General. In other words, Environment Canada and climate change have been unable to provide information to the Auditor General as to some large components of the plan to reach the 2030 target, such elements as expecting, part of the plan, a decrease in oil and gas emissions of 31% by 2030, for which there is no information available, and for which we learned today in committee, Environment Canada officials said some of that information is considered cabinet confidence. So recommendation 84 from Commissioner Jerry DeMarco is for transparency and more information. I have to say none of this surprised us as Greens. I am a bit surprised they'd call it cabinet confidence. But it was clear when we saw the 2030, the plan to hit 40 to 45% reductions against 2005 levels by 2030, that the plan was not a plan at all. There were no individual measures that were measured by how many megatons of carbon they would reduce. It was all, a listing rather than a plan, a list of measures with fingers crossed. And now we know that the plan itself, according to Environment Commissioner Jerry DeMarco, the plan is insufficient to reach the targets. Nous comprenons bien que maintenant la fenêtre va fermer avant le moment que c'est possible pour le Canada de faire notre part, mais le temps presse et la réalité du changement climatique est vraiment une urgence climatique et on doit agir et plus vite avec les décisions difficiles comme d'annuler les oléoducs, de changer nos politiques. Mais alors, je donne la parole à Jonathan Pedneau pour quelques minutes.
Alors, derrière nous, on va avoir une continuation aujourd'hui du triangle amoureux conservateur, néo-démocrate, libéral, qui continue à divertir les Canadiens, puis nous amène à opposer de manière absolument terrible le coût de la vie, d'une part, et l'environnement de l'autre. Alors que c'est très clair que les deux vont main dans la main. On ne peut pas avoir une économie forte dans ce pays sans des actions concrètes envers les changements climatiques. Malheureusement, on continue à avoir un gouvernement qui n'atteint pas ses objectifs, qui ne respecte pas ses promesses et qui, ce faisant, trahit les espoirs de ma génération et de plein de jeunes Canadiens partout à travers le pays. Alors, c'est une situation de crise qui continue, qui perdure. Et malheureusement, derrière nous, dans cette Chambre, qui devrait être l'endroit où se prennent des décisions, se trouvent des solutions, on continue à avoir des constants échanges absolument improductifs entre des gens qui placent leur ego avant les intérêts de notre pays puis des générations futures. Alors, nous, on va continuer à faire ce qu'on peut pour changer la donne puis surtout amener un discours productif à Ottawa, mais malheureusement, on continue de voir un gouvernement et une opposition officielle qui trahissent les espoirs des Canadiens.
Madame Lee, allez-vous appuyer le projet de loi anti-briseurs de grève?
Oui, absolument. Et nous sommes en faveur des droits des travailleurs partout.
Incluant tous les travailleurs au Québec qui sont présentement en grève, on supporte leurs demandes.
Given Mr. Guilbeault's background, I don't think anyone would question his passion for fighting climate change. So who do you blame for this, what you claim to be this government's lack of climate ambition?
I don't claim it. It's a matter of fact. From the top down, there's been a lack of commitment to really confront the climate crisis. One of the findings of the Environment Commissioner is that the responsibilities for delivering on the plan are fractured across many parts of government. There's no centralized authority. So, it's, as Commissioner DeMarco just told the Environment Committee, we've had 30 years of failures, not down to one party or another. We've had 30 years in which climate targets are adopted, whether Kyoto or Copenhagen or now Paris, where Canada is singularly the worst in the G7. We're the only country in the G7 that has not reduced its emissions as against its 1990 levels. The only country in the G7 that hasn't done that. So and in that 30 years, as the Commissioner just pointed out, we've had these fractured authorities. So perhaps we ought to try doing something different. We had in British Columbia, when the first carbon tax was put in place, by the way, by a pretty right-wing government, Gordon Campbell of the BC Liberals, but he created in the Premier's office a climate secretariat to make sure the plan was delivered. We don't have the equivalent thing here. I'd also say, in fairness, as much as I try to be fair to everybody, the Environment Canada and Climate Change as a department lost all of its climate science capacity in the Harper years and is yet to replace it, and has a lot of people within Environment Canada and Climate Change that I think, as a matter of civil service, for instance, on environmental assessment, we should have had a very good environmental assessment law. Instead, we got C-69, which I voted against, and one of the reasons I voted against it was I could see that it was disrespecting the federal responsibilities to do environmental assessment. So I think the civil service bears some of the responsibility here, and an compensation for constantly considering what will the government of Alberta say. They have a disproportionate impact in dragging down our climate plans. And then you look at the numbers, since 1990, the oil and gas sector has increased its greenhouse gas emissions by 88% since 1990, whereas the electricity sector has decreased by 45%. So again, as the Environment Commissioner was just testifying at committee, some parts of our society have reduced emissions, but any reduction in emissions in one part of the country or one part of the economy are overwhelmed by the massive increases in emissions from an expanding fossil fuel production.
As far as the civil service goes, what exactly do you think the problem is in the incapacity there, and what are the Greens proposing to do to fix that?
It's hard because it's a cultural change that occurred in the Harper years. So you ended up having, and I watched it as it happened, scientists were removed from Environment Canada and economists were put in. So the basic culture of the department became much more what natural resources had become already. Natural resources had become, and even more so in the Harper years. I even have friends in the mining industry and the forestry sector who said Natural Resources Canada had become the Department of Oil and Gas. So there was a cultural change and a personnel change and also a budgetary change. So Environment Canada and Climate Change as a department did not offer Catherine McKenna or Steven Guilbeault, here are a bunch of good ideas, push hard, go farther. Anyone who's talked to any of the people in ministerial staffs or within their circle always said, oh, the ministers worked really, really hard, but the department tells them they can't go as far as they want to go. So that's not right. We should have the way democracy works is you elect a government, and if it makes promises, it's supposed to deliver on them. And the one thing that's really clear after 8 years of Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister is that the broken promises are a really long list of tragic betrayals.
We have several ministers we got to
Yeah, sorry.